Okay, so now in this video, what I want to talk about is the Inmarsat data. Now, this is the data that was transmitted by MH370 as it was flying out to the Indian Ocean, the southern Indian Ocean. Now, there's been a lot of debate about this data, but basically, over the years, it comes down to the basic understanding of trigonometry and mathematics and nothing else. Now, a lot of people have contested the providence of this data as to whether it was fabricated or manipulated in some way, or if it was, was affected by some sort of interference. All of this has been looked at by hundreds, if not thousands, of engineers, satellite experts, mathematicians, myself, and many other people. And basically, the mathematics is the mathematics. And if you believe in the data and you believe in the mathematics, then the results you're going to get are this. So I'm going to explain this data briefly without trying to get into any theory. But I want to show you why this data is important to us. But unfortunately, it's of no use for finding MH370. So, anyways, so let's start with the data itself, which is this stuff here. This is a spreadsheet of all the signal communications between allegedly MH370 and the Inmarsat data network on that day. And as you can see, the data wasn't being recorded on one database. It was being recorded on multiple databases in real time, which makes it virtually impossible for anyone to have manipulated that data or tried to fabricate it in real time like that. It just is not possible. You would have to believe that someone at Inmarsat is a part of some grand conspiracy to deceive the public if you think that's what happened. But realistically, that's not what happened. This data that you're seeing here is authentic, unfabricated, unmanipulated data, and we should accept it as such. However, it's our interpretation of the data which may differ, and that's what I'm trying to point out to you in this presentation. So, anyways, let's look at what I'm looking at here. Okay, let's put this up. Okay, let's start with the rings. Now, what this data tells us, it gives us from 18, well, here it says 1828, but about 1825 onwards, we start to receive data from what we believe is MH370 transmitting this data flying out to the southern Indian Ocean. And the reason we believe this plane is MH370 because after this time period, 18, where are we here? Let me go here. Yeah, I want to highlight this period here. Yeah, if you look at the Inmarsat data at 1825, there was another, what they call the reboot, which I don't believe it's a reboot. I believe it was another plane transmitting this data. But anyways, what I'm trying to say here is that there was a gap in the data. The last transmission, I believe, from MH370 was at 1805, and it was a request for acknowledge, 1805. So after that, I believe MH370's satellite data unit on the aircraft was permanently shut off. That's what I believe. And now, let me go back to this picture here. So now the data that is transmitted from 1825 onwards only gives us logon request information and pings. It did 2 logon requests and 5 pings. to make 7 ping rings, as they call it. And what these rings represent is the distance the plane was from the center, or where the plane was from the Inmarsat satellite subsatellite position. Now, what is that? Okay, so let's bring this up now. Okay, so this is the Inmarsat subsatellite position, which is its GPS location on Earth. This is where the satellite was when this was occurring. Now, these positions here, these locations are in the center of these rings here, but you don't see it on the graphic. But anyways, these individual rings are calculated based on the time delay of these signals, which is the burst timing offset in microseconds. And based on the time delay, knowing the position of the satellite, its altitude, we can calculate these rings with fairly great precision. Now, some people will question the integrity of this data. How good is the BTO data to calculate this? And the answer is really comes from Inmarsat themselves. They did their own flight tests on individual flights from other planes, and they were able to verify using other flights their mathematics to verify how accurate the BTO calculations were. And they found them to be reasonably within accuracy. And they made statements on this multiple times. They said that the Inmarsat data is fine so long as no one spoofed it. That is the most accurate statement you'll find on the Inmarsat data, in my opinion. So I'm firmly of the belief that this data here is relatively accurate and authentic. The fact that it has corrupted data in it, as you can see here, as we can see the corrupted data, it only lends to the notion that this is authentic data. And we now better understand why this data is corrupted. And this has been done by analysis done by the IG group, who have determined that if you look at the BFOs, these corrupted data here, it's very likely this data is in error because when the unit was turned on, it did what's called a cold start, and the temperature of the oscillator wasn't up to its nominal temperature, so it made this, it wasn't producing the correct frequency. So this would create this kind of anomalous kind of data. However, in this data here is a different story because the unit was already turned on and then it was turned off again. And so we think this data is valid and indicates that the plane was in a nosedive at this point. So now let's get back to here. So if we get back to the BTOs now, I'll cover that a bit better in a second. But the point I'm trying to make is that what we know to be fact based on this data is that this plane was somewhere along these rings at these times, which means at 019 UTC, whatever plane was transmitting that data, which is believed to be MH370, was most likely somewhere along this arc down here. Now, why do we believe it's down here and not up here? Well, that's because Inmarsat did tests on this with various aircrafts, and they measured the BFO patterns of aircrafts flying south versus those flying north. And they found that the measured data, BFO pattern of data that was measured from MH370 matched more closely with the predicted data of the plane going south. So we're pretty sure from the BTO and BFO data that this plane was flying further away from the satellite going south down here. That's why we know it's down here. Now, people can disagree and argue and debate, but you ask any expert, IG member, Victor Ianello, Mike Exner, they'll tell you it's down there. The plane flew down there, and mathematics shows that. So now you can argue the mathematics all you want, but in the end, they're probably right. Okay, so that's one point I want to make is the authenticity of this data. It was reviewed by Mark Dickerson at Inmarsat. He explains what he did for the corrections for the anomalous results because he knew they were anomalous, so he had to correct them. We understand what he did. He explained it very well. It's well understood. There's no mystery here. So these ping rings that were approved by him, to imagine that he's part of some conspiracy is ridiculous. He did his job. He's a satellite engineer. He verified the data. He checked it, double checked it. Of course, he checked his math. Of course, he verified that the BTO data would be accurate. That's what he's supposed to do. He's paid to do that. So we should have confidence in this data and stop debating it. Sorry to lecture there, but I get a little frustrated after 10 years of hearing horseshit on this. Okay, so now, so we go back to the data and we say, okay, well, we know that the plane that was transmitting this data was heading south, but was it actually MH370? And this is where I get into my theory. What I believe happened is at 1805, the data, the satellite data unit on MH370 was permanently shut off. From that point on, the plane flew radio silent. No more communication whatsoever from MH370. Nothing from the transponder, with the exception of it maybe got picked up on radar near Polo Perak. That's it. No more data on MH370. What happened at 1825 was a satellite data unit was turned on a decoy. And the decoy was transmitting the exact same AES ID. This is the Airborne Earth Station ID. It was transmitting the same ID as MH370. So based on looking at this data, you would never know that. You would think, how does this guy know this? Well, I don't. I can't say specifically, but if you listen to what I'm saying here, there's a specific difference in the data from this point on. There's no ACARS data. Prior to this, there was plenty of ACARS data being sent from the plane to Inmarsat like normal. But at 1825, all we got was a logon request, 5 pings, and another logon request, but no data. No ACARS data. So that to me suggests this data, part of the data that you're looking at here, was coming from a decoy using the same ID. Now, that's the basic premise of my theory. Now, so let's go back here and let's study this a bit more. So from this time onwards, all these pings that we see here, let me go back here. Yeah, these pings here, these last 7 handshakes were not coming from MH370. I believe they were coming from a decoy. That's why the data is authentic. No one manipulated it. No one fabricated it. It just was being spoofed by another aircraft. That's what this guy said. That is fine, so long as no one spoofed it. Well, I think someone did. This is the only theory that is technically feasible. Alternative theory to the mainstream theory that it was MH370 that crashed along that arc. There's only 2 possibilities on this data. Either MH370 crashed along that 7th arc, or it was another plane transmitting that data. And there is no other explanation technically feasible that will explain this. So if MH370 did crash somewhere else, it means another plane was transmitting that data. And that plane is what flew into the southern Indian Ocean, not MH370. So now, if you have a decoy, and the decoy has a airborne earth station system like this, that includes the satellite data unit, this unit here. Now, if you go into this unit on the circuit board, there's 24 jumpers, I believe, which set these 24-bit hexadecimal address for the unit itself. It gives the unit its unique AES ID. All they have to do on another B77 is go into that unit, reconfigure the jumpers so that it transmits the same ID as MH370. And to do that is what is important is you cannot have two units transmitting the same ID at the same time. That would create a network error. So it's important that MH370's unit was turned off before this unit was turned on. So when this unit was turned on, Inmarsat would not be able to tell the difference between the two aircrafts and would just assume it was MH370 flying out to the Indian Ocean. So that's how they spoofed the data with another aircraft, similar engine performance, flying south into the Indian Ocean, transmitting and just pinging the satellite without any ACARS data being transmitted so that it would not give away its exact position. Ironically, when they were calling the aircraft, I believe they were ringing the phone on the decoy. That's why no one answered. I believe the decoy was flying under satellite control via a Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot. Now, I have some really interesting research I came across recently by a pilot named former captain pilot United Airlines, Dan Hanley, who has done magnificent research on the existence of the Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot. Highly recommend people read his research on that. But I'm convinced that it did exist in 2014, and I believe that both MH370 and this plane, the decoy, was flying under remote satellite control. Okay, I'm not going to go too much more into that. Okay, so for what I believe, the first part of the, let me skip ahead here now. Get through this. Okay, let me bring this up here first. So when you look at the radar data, this is another set of radar data that I think is fine and perfect. I don't care what the RMF says about this data. I think it was no calibration error whatsoever. Nothing. The calibration error would be marginal at best. Nothing significant. And that's why I believe this data is realistic and needs to be taken seriously. Just as this needs to be taken as seriously as the Inmarsat data itself, with the same consideration. So I believe what we're seeing here in the first half of the radar data is a fighter jet, not MH370. And there is no calibration error here because if there was, why does this part of the radar data look like it's normal? Because that part of the data is coming from a B77 decoy. This is a fighter jet, and this is a decoy, B77. Neither plane is MH370. So now another thing people say is there's no way a fighter jet can descend 40,000 feet in 1 minute. Not true. If you look up an F-18 Super Hornet, it can ascend, rate of climb, 44,000 feet in 1 minute. That's an F-18 Super Hornet within its performance capabilities. So if it can do that, it can definitely descend 40,000 feet in a minute. So it's very possible that a fighter jet could have made this radar track. Okay, now what I believe happens is the fighter jet actually drops off radar, lands on an aircraft carrier, and I believe the decoy took off from Butterworth Air Force Base and flew along the Straits of Malacca at low altitude and then ascended onto radar around the waypoint Vampy. I don't have a good enough graphic right now, but it was coming right here. Right, this point here is where it was ascending onto radar. The yellow line here represents the fighter jet. The green track represents the decoy, the B-77 decoy. So it was coming onto radar right around here. And I believe the altitude data here is perfectly correct. It was at 29,500 feet when it was coming off radar at 1822, somewhere around this area here. And at 1825, at this time here, that's when the SDU was switched on after it went off radar at 1825 around where the first ping arc is, and that plane flew out towards the Andaman Sea, made a turn in the Andaman Sea, and flew out to the southern Indian Ocean. But that plane was not MH370; it was a decoy, and I believe this is the decoy, N105 GT. I'm hoping to maybe find more evidence of that in the future, but for now, that's my best guess on what this plane was. I believe it was a plane like this that was retrofitted with a Boeing Honeywell uninterrupted autopilot. It was capable of auto takeoff, auto cruise, auto landing, and even auto ditching. And it had a satellite data unit on it that could be turned on and off remotely so that they could log on and log off at any time, switch it on off. And that would create the perfect illusion of data. It would make it was the perfect way to cover their tracks by using this method. Anyways, now, okay, so we get to this point here, and now we come to, well, where did it go after that ping, that first ping? Well, here's where the UAP video comes in. Now, some people, it's a very controversial piece of evidence, but I still am of the opinion that this is real video that was edited with CGI. I do not believe that the portal in this video is real. I believe that was an added effect. I also believe that they may have manipulated the clouds in this video for some reason and put in a false background just to eliminate the need to do masking in the video. But if you look at the FLIR video, I think the only thing fake in that video is the portal, but everything else is real. Anyways, that's my opinion at this point. And the reason I bring it up is because I believe it fits into the MH370 puzzle right here. This is where I believe that the plane was turning in the Andaman Sea at those video coordinates. And that's where it was being filmed, in this area here. Okay? And I believe it's showing the plane coming from the northwest, heading south, as the Inmarsat data predicts. And it did not go through a porthole. It kept flying for another 5 hours and 32 minutes. It did the turn around 1847. I did some more calculations on that and was able to determine it would be around 1847 that it would have been making this turn. So If people don't want to believe in that video still, and they think it's all CGI, well, go ahead. I'm not going to force anyone to believe it, but I think it's still real. I think there's CGI in it, but I think it has some reality to it. And I believe the coordinates do show where the plane did make its turn into the southern Indian Ocean. It's about as good a guess as anyone else's, so I'm sticking with it. All right. So I'll talk about that video probably in another video, but not too much in this one. All right, next. Okay, so we get the Catherine T sighting again. The sighting I want to talk about is not the one about the glowing orange plane. I explained that in the previous video, but it's the high flying plane that she saw. I believe that's the plane in the video that was flying at high altitude. It was not on fire. Those are contrails, not smoke trails. The plane is at high altitude and it was flying south into the Indian Ocean. And this is the plane that Kate saw around, I estimate, around 1900 UTC, flying south into the southern Indian Ocean. So I think she saw that plane as it was heading that way, but that's not the glowing orange plane that she saw. That was the MH370, which was going west, and I explained that in my previous video. Anyways, so now we get to here's where Kate's position was on the map. It's somewhere around this area here. I have it marked here. That's where her position was when that plane was flying south by her. Okay, so I believe the plane continued to fly for another 5 hours and 32 minutes, flying away from the satellite, which is why the BTOs increase and why the VFOs match the track heading south. And it crashed somewhere down in this area. And this is the area we're talking about. In particular, it's difficult to say exactly where in this area. And that's where you have to rely on the experts to give you a bit more insight into that. But I firmly believe what happened is this decoy flew down to this area and it did its last transmission down along this arc right here. That's where it did its last transmission. And at this point, initially I thought it crashed and then was ditched in the ocean down here, whatever. But I'm now of the opinion that it simply just ended its transmission at 019 UTC, but it did not crash anywhere near that arc. And that's why we're never going to find a trace of MH370 down there, because nothing ever crashed down there. And so what I believe happened was, in reality, this plane flew back to Australia. It was being seen by 3 witnesses. Actually, I believe there's more than 3 now, but I have a report on 3 of these witnesses who saw this low-flying plane coming in off the coast, heading at very low altitude, looking like MH370. One witness said they saw no one in the cockpit, no one on board. Another witness in Bruce Rock said it looked identical to MH370. And this witness said it was flying south right out into the southern Indian Ocean. Now, I believe this was happening at 1:30, 2 o'clock, 2:30, approximately those times there. That's about 5:30 UTC time. Would have been about 5 hours after it had transmitted its data over here. Now, I believe this was a fully fueled Boeing 777-200ER aircraft, identical to MH370, but it was fully fueled. So it could fly for at least, almost 12 hours. So I believe what the plane did was it flew out to the Indian Ocean out here, ended its transmission at this point, and then it flew very slowly at low altitude back towards Australia. It did not want to get picked up on radar. So I think it took a really long time to get there, but it was flying at low altitudes. Okay, so now the plane is flying low over Australia. And what I believe happened is it may have done a stop at an Air Force base, which is around in this area here. It's called, I believe, Pierce Air Force Base. I'm not sure about the name. I'll have to check that again. Pierce or Parse Air Force Base, which is in this area here. And I believe the plane was flying in to that Air Force base, and it probably, I think, did a brief stopover, got refueled, and then probably had some equipment removed from it, whatever, black boxes, whatever, and it was prepped to get ditched. So what I think happened was it landed at that Air Force base, it got refueled, and then it took off again, and it flew by this area here, Bruce Rock, where a witness named Richard saw it fly by him, and he swears today that he saw MH370. That plane to him looked identical to MH370. And so he saw it fly by him, and then this plane continued seemingly south, and it was seen by a woman named Judith here in Nayabing, and she saw it continue to head south, flying low. So I believe what happened was this plane, after it did a little stopover here in Australia at an Air Force base, flew back out into the South Indian Ocean, and it was ditched down in this area. Let me see if we can pull that graphic up here, this area. It was ditched down here. It flew out from Australia, it came down this way, and they ditched it over here. And this is where these debris pieces that I'm showing you here were located, in this area. Here you have what's clearly could be a piece of a fuselage. It's approximately 40 meters wide. We suspect that the wingtips were broken off, but geometric shape is consistent with geometric shape of a B-77 aircraft. So all we can say is it's similar in size and appearance and geometric shape, but it's a very good match to a possible piece of an aircraft. Here's another piece, which it looks like nose cone. It measures 10 meters wide, which is consistent with what we see on these graphics of the width of a nose cone of a 777. These are the windows, what we believe are the windows, and that's the nose cone. And down here we have another piece which was spotted down in this area, which looks like the tail fin. Similar dimensions, 20 meters. We're talking about objects here which are, a good size here. This can't just be random debris. This is 20 meters wide, 70 feet. So it has that shape, 70 feet. It's a pretty good match with a piece of an aircraft. So anyways, I believe that's where this plane that transmitted the Inmarsat data, the decoy, the plane that was seen on the UAP video, crashed down here. And this is how its debris would have drifted towards southern Australia. Now, it's possible a lot of the debris just drifted into the Antarctica circumpolar current, but there's certainly a possibility some of the debris that was in those images down here could have ended up over here, which brings us to this interesting possibility. This guy, Kit Oliver. If you don't know the story about him, well, it's all in the news, but he apparently, in October 2014, not far from Robe, Australia, about 55 kilometers to the west, he spotted what he thought was a wing piece from a passenger aircraft. It was a very large piece that got caught in his net. He struggled it for over a day to get it on board. They couldn't do anything with it, so they just cut the $20,000 net loose, and the piece sank in the ocean where he's pointing to in this picture. And he says it was a bloody great wing of a big jet airliner, he says. He takes a breath as if confronted by the memory. I questioned it myself. I've looked for a way out of this, he says. I wish to Christ I'd never seen the thing, but there it is. It was just a jet's wing. Oliver dismisses any suggestions the subject was a wing from a small plane. He held a pilot's license when he was young man and flew several small planes such as Cessnas. So this is a guy who knows the difference between a passenger jet and a small airplane, and he says it's from a passenger jet. So if he's telling the truth, then what passenger jet crashed down there? Can't be MH370 because MH370's debris showed up in Africa. This is some other plane. So he gave the location of where the piece is, and hopefully one day someone will go find it. Now here's what's really interesting. Where his piece was found was not only kilometers away from where another piece was found on Kangaroo Island back in 2016 by a fellow named Samuel Armstrong. He came across this piece of aircraft debris, and it was analyzed, and it was determined it was a piece of an aircraft, but they could not determine what aircraft it came from. They just know from the markings that it was not consistent with a Boeing stencil marking, so it's not to them not consistent with a Boeing plane like MH370. So they believe this piece is not from MH370. But nonetheless, they've never identified what aircraft it was from. And what's interesting about this piece is the stencil marking has been seen, similar stencil markings have been seen on military aircraft and hardware. I saw a picture once of this on a missile wingtip, but it was a different color texture, but it was a similar stencil decal for honeycomb surface, no step. So anyways, you have these two pieces now. Oliver's piece is here, and the Kangaroo Island piece was found here. So if we can find Kit's piece, that would tell us possibly the tail number of the plane that crashed down here, and which I believe is the plane that transmitted the Inmarsat data and is a decoy. Anyways, I'm going to stop the video here, and I'm going to do some more on this on other videos, but I wanted to at least explain, give you my interpretation of the Inmarsat data and why I believe there's a decoy down in the southern Indian Ocean, and why I believe the Inmarsat data is absolutely useless for finding MH370. All right. Have a nice day. Bye.